Chapter 1: The Crime of the Century. Part 1: 2 decades overdue. My life took a sharp left-hand turn on March 21st, 1999, the day after my 40th birthday, the day all of this started. I was in bed with a hangover, as I'd been after countless birthdays before, and I felt an acute burst of self-loathing. I was a freelance journalist who hadn't worked in 4 months. I'd fallen into journalism almost by accident. For years, I'd driven a horse and carriage on the night shift at Central Park, and over time, my unsolicited submissions to magazines like New York had led to bigger and better assignments. While I was happy now to be living in my Venice Beach and making a living as a writer, I missed New York. And mine was still a precarious existence. My friends had obligations. They all started families, and they worked long hours in busy offices. They led full lives. Even though my youth was behind me, I was so untethered that I could sleep into the afternoon. Actually, I couldn't afford to do much else at that point. I felt like a mess. When the phone rang, I had to make a real effort just to pick it up. It was Leslie Van Berskirk, my former editor from U.S. Magazine, now at Premiere, with an assignment. The 30th anniversary of the Manson murders was coming up, and she wanted a reported piece about the aftershocks in Hollywood. So many years later, Manson's name still served as a kind of shorthand for a very American form of brutal violence. The kind that erupts seemingly from nowhere and confirms the nation's darkest fears about itself. The crime still had held great sway over the public imagination. My editor said, "What was it that made Manson so special? Why had he and the family lingered in the cultural conversation when other, even more macabre murderers had faded from memory?" Premiere was a film magazine, so my editor wanted me to talk to Hollywood's old guard, the generation that had found itself in disturbing proximity to Manson, and to find out how they felt with 3 decades of perspective. It was a loose concept. Leslie trusted me to find good direction for it and to shape it into something unexpected. I almost said no. I'd never been particularly interested in the Manson murders. I was 10 years old when they happened. Growing up in Philadelphia, and though my brother swears up and down that he remembers me keeping a scrapbook about the crimes, I can't recall how they affected me in the slightest. If anything, I thought I was one of the few people on the planet who'd never read a Helter Skelter. Like an overplayed song or an iconic movie, Manson held little interest to me precisely because he was ubiquitous. The murders he ordered were often discussed as the crime of the century, and crimes of the century tend to be pretty well picked over. But I needed the job, and I trusted Leslie's judgment. We'd worked together on a number of stories at U.S. It was a monthly magazine then, and not a bi-weekly tabloid. And a piece like this, pitch black, would be a welcome departure from my routine as an entertainment writer, which called for a lot of sit-down meetings with movie stars in their cushy Hollywood Hills homes, where they trot out lines about brave career choices and the need for privacy. That's not to say the work was without its twists and turns. I'd gotten in a shouting match with Tom Cruise about Scientology. Gary Shandling had somehow found a way to abandon me during an interview in his own home. And I'd pissed off Alec Baldwin. but who hasn't? I had some chops, in other words, but not much in the way of investigative bona fides. For a recent story about an unsolved murder, I chased down some great leads, but because my case was mostly circumstantial, the magazine sensibly decided to play it safe, and the piece came out toothless. This time, I thought, I could do better. In fact, through the fog of my hangover, I remember thinking, this will be easy. I agreed to file 5,000 words in 3 months. Afterward, I thought, maybe I could move back to New York. 20 years later, the piece isn't finished, the magazine no longer exists, and I'm still in LA.